A flight attendant tried to shove a black CEO off the jet bridge, but the CEO calmly pulled the flight manifest, and the crew immediately realized their mistake. A flight attendant tried to shove the black CEO off the jet bridge, thinking no one would stop him. He didn't realize the CEO had the manifest in hand, and everything about the flight was about to change. Subscribe if you believe arrogance always collapses when true authority acts. The shove came out of nowhere. Kaedin Rhyss had just turned slightly to adjust the strap of his briefcase when the sudden pressure struck his shoulder. It was forceful, sharp, and purposeful, not the clumsy bump of a rushed traveler, but the deliberate push of someone aiming to send him off balance. His body lurched toward the narrow edge of the jet bridge where a slim metal railing was all that separated him from the drop beside the terminal connector. Time slowed for a fraction of a second. Kaedin's hand shot out instinctively, fingers grasping the cold steel of the handrail. His knees bent slightly from the impact, but he held firm, catching himself just inches from disaster. Behind him, Senior Flight Attendant Dornell Trask recoiled, his expression unreadable, somewhere between feigned surprise and a twitch of concealed guilt. He straightened his jacket and muttered under his breath, "Slippery flooring. Careful." Kaedin turned fully now, his grip still tight on the railing. His heartbeat pounded once, then again, echoing in his ears. He studied Dornell's face, calm on the surface but with tension buried just beneath the eyes, the kind that betrayed someone trying too hard to appear indifferent. "Do you normally push passengers toward railings when floors become unsafe?" Kaedin asked, his tone calm but edged with quiet sharpness. He didn't raise his voice, but the words landed like a challenge. Dornell didn't answer. He merely gave a slight shrug and tapped at the device strapped to his wrist, a display that blinked once in response, showing a faint red pulse. Kaedin noticed the tap, and something in his mind filed it away. That wasn't standard issue. He had reviewed hundreds of flight deck protocols. Flight attendants didn't wear wrist devices with silent alert functions. He didn't have time to dig into the thought. A man stepped cautiously toward them from the boarding area, Trevin Merrick. Kaedin recognized him vaguely from the terminal lounge, the quiet type who kept to himself. Trevin's eyes shifted from Kaedin's posture to Dornell's stiff stance, then to the subtle tension in the air. He paused a few steps away, as if sensing he had arrived mid-scene. Dornell shifted sideways and gestured toward the bridge door ahead. "We've reassigned your seat. Operational reasons," he said, his voice low but tight, as if reciting from a script he didn't believe in. Kaedin didn't move. His posture relaxed, but only on the surface. Internally, his thoughts raced, threading together inconsistencies. First, the wrist device. Then, the red alert when his boarding pass was scanned. Now, the seat reassignment. He wasn't just being shuffled around, he was being handled. He gave a tight nod, keeping his tone polite. "I wasn't notified of any reassignment." Dornell gave a forced smile. "It must have been last minute. We're still updating systems." Behind them, the overhead lights buzzed softly and flickered, washing the narrow bridge in a moment of dim, stuttered light before stabilizing. The flicker matched the mood, off-kilter, unstable, like something mechanical was being masked as routine. Trevin moved again, pretending to fumble in his coat pocket. "I think I dropped my boarding pass back there," he murmured, stepping closer, trying to dissolve the tension. But Dornell snapped his head around. "Stay back," he said sharply, eyes narrowing. Kaedin tilted his head. There was no reason to respond to Trevin so aggressively unless something needed to be hidden. He pivoted slightly and took a half-step toward the bridge door. It didn't open. A mechanical click rang out, low, firm, unmistakable. The door had just locked from the inside. Kaedin looked over Dornell's shoulder and saw him tap the wrist device again. No keys, no manual panel, just a soft tap and a lock. Now it was clear. This wasn't about customer service. It wasn't a mix-up. It was containment. The corridor felt suddenly smaller, the air thinner. Kaedin shifted his briefcase in his left hand and gave a slow nod, not to Dornell, but to himself. He knew this game now. He had faced it before in boardrooms, but this time, the suit and tie had been replaced with an airline uniform and a hidden wrist device. He looked Dornell in the eye and said, "Unlock the door." Dornell didn't respond. Instead, he reached again, this time toward a panel mounted near the bridge wall, disguised as a routine terminal reset module. But Kaedin's father had worked airfield tech his entire life. Kaedin had grown up watching him repair jetway hydraulics, bridge seals, emergency locks. He knew exactly what that panel was, and it was not to be touched by flight staff during boarding, not without triggering an anomaly flag in the system logs. "Step away from the panel," Kaedin said, firmer this time. Trevin inched closer, tension radiating from his shoulders. "Is everything all right?" he asked, voice tentative. Dornell turned on him now. "Back off." It was a mistake, a slip. His voice had too much panic, too little control. Kaedin reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a card. Not just any pass, but a digital manifest card, issued only to senior contractors and executive partners with clearance above standard operating crew. He held it between two fingers, just high enough for Dornell to see. The red border glowed faintly, its chip active, silently transmitting clearance metadata through the bridge's internal systems. Dornell's breath caught. Trevin saw it too, the slight flicker of fear behind Dornell's eyes. Kaedin stepped closer. "This gives me more authority on this aircraft than you have. So, if there's a reason you tried to push me off the bridge, I suggest you explain it before I ask the captain directly." Dornell's lips parted, but no words came out. Just a shallow breath and a flick of the eyes toward the panel again. Kaedin didn't move. Trevin didn't either. The corridor was dead silent. The hum of the terminal far behind them. The sealed aircraft ahead. The tension stretched until Dornell blinked hard and stepped back, as if calculating his next move or bracing for someone else's. Kaedin didn't lower the card. "Something tells me," he said quietly, "that shove was planned long before I reached Gate 12B. And just like that, the balance shifted. The jet bridge was no longer a walkway. It had become the first battlefield." Kaedin steadied himself instantly, fingers tightening around the cold metal railing as Dornell stepped back with a forced calm, muttering that the bridge flooring was slippery. The excuse landed flat in the narrow space, echoing against the hollow walls of the jet bridge. Trevin Merrick, now only a short distance behind, froze mid-step. His eyes widened, his breath caught halfway in his throat, and the realization settled over him like a sudden weight. He had just witnessed a deliberate shove, not an accident. Dramatic irony thickened between them. Dornell behaved as if he were invisible, unaware that Trevin had seen everything with perfect clarity. Kaedin straightened slowly, smoothing the front of his blazer in a deliberate motion that signaled control rather than fear. His voice carried a calm edge when he spoke. "Do you usually push passengers toward the railing when the floors become unsafe?" he asked, watching Dornell's expression like a man reading a faulty instrument. The question cut through the air, yet Dornell refused to acknowledge it. Instead, he raised his chin sharply and barked, "Your briefcase must be checked. High-grade electronics aren't permitted past this point." The statement stopped Kaedin cold. It was the wrong line from the wrong person. Only security officers use that phrase, and Dornell was not one. The tension tightened around him like a drawn cable. Kaedin's instincts sharpened as he noticed Dornell's fingers tapping rapidly against the small device strapped to his wrist. One quick press, another. Then a silent signal pulsed through the air, followed by a mechanical click behind them. The bridge door locked. Trevin's head snapped toward the sound. Kaedin felt the space shrink around him, the sealed entrance turning the walkway into a narrow trap between him and Dornell. "I dropped my boarding pass," Trevin said suddenly, his voice thin but steady as he stepped forward, attempting to break the rising tension. Dornell's reaction was immediate. He snapped, "Stay back," with a sharpness that made the overhead lights flicker. Kaedin's focus narrowed to Dornell's hand as it drifted toward a concealed control panel beside the door. He recognized it instantly. His father had worked with these systems for years, and Kaedin had grown up learning every hidden switch and override used in airport walkways. That panel should never be touched during passenger loading, not unless someone wanted the bridge sealed for a particular reason, a reason standing right in front of him. Instead of confronting Dornell outright, Kaedin moved with calm precision. He reached inside his coat and withdrew a slim, silver-edged pass, the digital manifest card. The moment it entered the dim jet bridge light, the embedded circuits shimmered faintly. Dornell's eyes widened, his face draining of confidence. That card was not standard. It belonged only to aircraft partners or executives with direct operational authority. Trevin watched closely, sensing the shift in power. The air seemed to hold its breath. Kaedin took one controlled step forward. "Before we go any further," he said, his voice low but unwavering, "I want to know why I was targeted before boarding." Dornell's mask cracked. His jaw tightened and a flicker of panic flashed across his face, a brief, raw glimpse of the truth beneath the scripted hostility. For a single second, his composure slipped enough to reveal everything Kaedin needed to know. This was no misunderstanding. This had been arranged, and Kaedin had walked directly into it. Trevin felt the tension coil tighter in the air, as if the bridge itself were bracing for the next moment. Dornell's breathing hitched, his wrist hovering near the device as if he were waiting for instructions that were no longer arriving quickly enough. The entire walkway seemed to tilt toward danger. Kaedin's grip tightened around the manifest card. Dornell's eyes followed the movement like a man watching evidence load into a courtroom. The silence between them cut sharper than any accusation. And Kaedin understood, with chilling clarity, that the hostility had begun long before he stepped onto this jet bridge. It had begun before he even reached the gate, before he even knew he was in danger. The shove had been planned long before he reached Gate 12B. Trevin Merrick barely had time to register what was happening when two junior flight attendants emerged from the aircraft side of the jet bridge. Their expressions were puzzled, drawn instantly to the raised voices and the mechanical click of the door that had just locked behind Kaedin Rhyss. The taller of the two, a lean man named Joran Vale, blinked at the scene before him. Senior Attendant Dornell Trask standing rigid and flushed, Kaedin still composed but clearly being blocked from the aircraft entrance. "Did one of you initiate a seating reassignment?" Kaedin asked calmly, slipping the manifest card back into his coat pocket with practiced ease. Joran looked at the other attendant, a young man with sandy hair named Aaron Pell. Both shook their heads in unison. "We haven't even started pre-cabin checks yet, sir," Aaron said quickly, eyes darting from Kaedin to Dornell. Dornell snapped, far too aggressively for the moment. "Return to your stations. Now." His voice cracked slightly, but the authority he tried to project only unsettled the juniors more. Kaedin didn't flinch. He stepped forward just enough to reassert presence, not challenge. "The bridge door is locked behind me," he said evenly. "Manually override it, please. It's registering a false seal." Both attendants hesitated, exchanging a nervous glance. Only senior crew had authority to override a bridge lock, but Kaedin's tone, and the subtle command in his posture, gave them pause. He didn't sound like a passenger. He sounded like someone who knew exactly how the system should work. Joran moved slowly to the panel, but before he could touch it, he stopped. "There's something else," he murmured. "The captain just sent a note over comms. He said there's a security anomaly involving Row 1. Kaedin's spine stiffened. Row 1A was his seat. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The implications landed like lead. The reassignment, the bridge lock, the sudden surge in hostility. Something or someone was waiting in his seat, and whoever had arranged it didn't want him anywhere near it. Trevin stepped forward, voice low and steady. "Are you all right, sir?" Before Kaedin could answer, Dornell lashed out. With a sudden shove, Dornell slammed Trevin against the jet bridge railing, hard enough to rattle the metal. Trevin staggered but caught himself, blinking in shock. The silence afterward was instant and heavy. That was the moment Kaedin understood. This wasn't just a hostile crew member having a bad day. Dornell was trying to isolate him. Kaedin's instincts kicked in like a second language. His right hand moved subtly toward the silver latch on his briefcase, pressing inward with a small click. Inside, the custom-built micro-recorder activated. Years ago, he had designed the briefcase with discrete audio and visual recording, meant to protect corporate intellectual property during off-site negotiations. Today, it would serve a more urgent purpose. Dornell saw the movement and lunged, his hand darting toward the case with the desperation of a man trying to stop a fuse from being lit. But Kaedin was faster. He stepped back sharply, voice rising, not loud but precise. "If you touch me again," he said, "this case will auto-transmit footage to Aerolux headquarters." Dornell stopped mid-motion, his fingers frozen inches from the case handle. The threat wasn't idle. The case's small LED blinked softly, proof the mechanism was active. Trevin stood upright again, his chest heaving slightly, but his eyes were clear. "He shoved you, too," he muttered. "On the bridge. I saw it." Kaedin gave him a slight nod of thanks but didn't take his gaze off Dornell. The man's posture had changed now, no longer forceful, but cornered. His mouth moved slightly, searching for a retort that never came. Aaron, now visibly nervous, stepped forward and tapped the manual bypass. With a soft whir and mechanical pop, the bridge door unlocked behind them. The way out had returned, but Kaedin had no intention of using it. Dornell moved again, but Kaedin shifted his weight, briefcase swinging slightly to block the attempt. Dornell's fingers closed around empty air. "Why?" Kaedin said slowly. "Are you still blocking the entrance?" Dornell tried to speak, but no words came out, just a faint rasp of breath and the flicker of panic. Trevin looked toward the cockpit door, then back at Kaedin. "You want the captain?" "Not yet," Kaedin murmured. "Not until we get proof." The air shifted, tighter, heavier, like the cabin itself was watching. Kaedin stared at Dornell, no longer asking, interrogating with his eyes. "Why is every system you've touched today, your device, the lock, the seating manifest, behaving abnormally?" It was a rhetorical question, one designed to corner. Dornell flinched. "You weren't supposed to be on this flight," he said suddenly, the words slipping out like steam from a crack in a pressure valve. Kaedin blinked. Just once. There it was, confirmation. He wasn't on some random flight experiencing minor turbulence. He was the turbulence someone had tried to prevent, and the plane hadn't even left the ground yet. Then a voice echoed faintly from the overhead comms. "Row 1 inspection complete, awaiting clearance." Kaedin's blood went cold. Someone was inside row 1. Someone who didn't want to be seen. Someone who'd been waiting for the seat to stay empty. Dornell reached forward again in a last-ditch effort to drag Kaedin away from the entry. But this time, Trevin stepped between them. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Even Dornell didn't expect it. Kaedin raised the manifest card slowly, angling it toward the small lens just above the bridge door frame, the integrated camera that tracked all boarding activity for timestamping and log review. The red light blinked once. Recording. He held the card steady, letting it be seen, letting the system see him. Dornell's breath caught in his throat. Kaedin leaned in slightly, his voice even but commanding. "I'm boarding now, and I'm not boarding quietly." Trevin stayed close behind, his pace deliberate, as the two junior attendants stepped aside in silence, watching a silent confrontation unfold that neither training nor protocol had ever prepared them for. The tension thickened with every step Kaedin took toward the threshold. Something was inside row 1, and Kaedin Rhyss was done being kept from it. The jet bridge was no longer a walkway. It had become a trap, one that was failing to close. Dornell lunged just as the emergency bypass disengaged the bridge lock with a sharp metallic click. Kaedin pivoted fast, sensing the attack before it fully formed. His briefcase swung naturally with the motion, tilting just enough to misalign Dornell's grasp. The flight attendant's fingers closed on empty air, his momentum pulling him slightly off balance. Kaedin didn't flinch. He adjusted his footing, steadied the briefcase against his hip, and stared back with the poise of someone who had prepared for far worse. Dornell's breathing sharpened, more irritated now than panicked. But the cracks had begun to show. His shoulders tensed. A single muscle twitched at the corner of his jaw. Behind them, the two junior attendants who had opened the door hesitated in silence. One glanced toward the aircraft cabin nervously. They had expected a routine fix, certainly not a standoff between a senior crew member and a boarding executive. Trevin stepped forward carefully, the tension in his voice low but firm. "Captain needs to be brought into this." Kaedin shook his head once, sharply. "Not yet," he muttered. "I need more than a complaint. I need confirmation." Dornell's mouth tightened. He turned toward the attendants and hissed, "Get back to your stations. Now." The command was brittle, desperate. Neither of them moved. Kaedin remained calm, but his voice sharpened as he addressed Dornell directly. "Why is every system you've touched malfunctioning today? Your wrist device, the bridge lock, the seat manifest." He took a measured step forward. "Explain that to me." Dornell's lips parted as if to deflect, but the answer came too fast, unfiltered. "You weren't supposed to be on this flight." The words hung in the air like a flare in darkness. Kaedin's expression didn't change, but his thoughts swirled. Calculations, timestamps, access logs. His fingers gripped the briefcase just a little tighter. Behind him, the speaker overhead crackled alive, interrupting the silence with static before a calm, automated voice announced, "Row 1 inspection complete, awaiting clearance." Kaedin turned his head slowly toward the aircraft door. Row 1A was his assigned seat. The timing was too perfect. Someone was already in that row, someone preparing it, someone who didn't expect Kaedin to make it past the bridge. Dornell's next move was less controlled. He reached again, not for the briefcase this time, but for Kaedin's arm, intending to pull him back. But Trevin stepped in. He moved faster than anyone expected, placing himself directly between them with his arms partially raised, not in aggression, but in refusal. "That's enough," he said, his voice steady but tight with adrenaline. Dornell recoiled in surprise, eyes flicking toward the attendants for backup, but they stood frozen, watching. Kaedin, seizing the moment, withdrew the manifest card from his coat and held it high, directly in front of the bridge's ceiling camera. The red lens blinked once, then twice, logging a timestamp, a visual confirmation, and positional tracking. It was enough to trigger a system-wide recording flag for irregular crew passenger obstruction. Dornell saw it happen and his breath caught audibly. His mouth twitched, caught between a command and a confession. Kaedin stepped closer, voice low, precise. "This is obstruction," and the camera just saw all of it. No one moved. The red indicator above the door continued to pulse faintly, blinking with a steady rhythm, evidence accumulating in silence. Trevin glanced toward Kaedin. "What now?" Kaedin turned toward the aircraft entrance, his briefcase secure, his eyes set. "I'm boarding now," he said, stepping past Dornell without waiting for a response. "And I'm not boarding quietly." Trevin followed closely behind as the attendants stepped aside, watching the silent clash unfold with growing unease. Something dangerous waited inside row 1, and Kaedin was walking straight into it. The cabin fell into a hush the instant Kaedin Rhyss stepped through the aircraft door. The air was thick with a tension no one could name, but everyone could feel. Conversations died mid-sentence. Eyes shifted cautiously, some toward the man with the confident stride, others toward the flight attendant behind him whose rigid posture gave away more than words ever could. Kaedin's sharp gaze swept the first-class section, not out of curiosity, but instinct. Row 1A, his assigned seat, was not empty. A tall man sat in it, unbothered and composed, a short, neatly trimmed beard framing a face that was unfamiliar yet oddly deliberate in its stillness. A tablet rested in his lap and his fingers tapped against it in a slow, steady rhythm. But it was his name tag that drew Kaedin's attention first. It was flipped backward, an old trick used by personnel who preferred not to be identified in casual scans. Kaedin's jaw tightened slightly, a quiet signal that his instincts were now fully awake. Trevin Merrick, who had followed closely behind, leaned in. "He's been there since pre-boarding," he whispered, voice low and taut. "Didn't speak to anyone. Just sat down and kept tapping that thing like he was syncing up with something." Kaedin's eyes zeroed in on the tablet. He recognized the interface instantly. It wasn't a passenger entertainment system or a crew schedule app. It was a diagnostic screen, one reserved for use by engineers, flight officers, or captains. The man was operating in a space he had no business accessing. Kaedin stepped forward with calm authority. "Excuse me," he said, voice level. "I believe there's been a mix-up. That's my assigned seat, row 1A." The stranger looked up slowly. A subtle smile crossed his lips, like someone who already knew this moment was coming. "Assigned by special request," he replied as if the words settled the matter. Kaedin's brow furrowed. "Whose request?" Before the man could respond, Dornell Trask barged forward from behind, speaking louder than necessary. "Dr. Rhyss has been moved to 5C for safety rotation." The words came fast, brittle. His voice cracked slightly at the end, betraying the nerves he could no longer hide. Kaedin turned slightly, not taking his eyes off the seated stranger. "Safety rotation isn't a valid reason for overriding a contracted executive seat," he said quietly, yet with unmistakable weight. "Protocols are protocols," Dornell snapped. Kaedin looked back to the man seated in 1A. "Your name?" The man didn't answer. Instead, with a smooth motion, he powered down the tablet and angled the screen away, cutting off whatever stream of information had been flowing. His silence spoke louder than any reply could. Overhead, the cabin lights flickered, not the soft dimming that signaled departure readiness, but a sudden jolt of brightness followed by a blink of shadow. A mechanical tremor ran through the ceiling panels. Trevin looked up, eyebrows raised. "Did you see that?" he muttered. Kaedin nodded subtly. His gaze shifted upward to the vent above row 1A. The slotted panel was slightly ajar, but what caught his attention were the markings inside. Thin etchings and metallic braces that did not belong to any standard aircraft ventilation system. He had helped design some of Aerolux's modular safety units. He knew what should and should not be in that space. Then the stranger stood. His movement was slow but deliberate, his gaze locked with Kaedin's. He reached into his coat and pulled out a badge, one with lettering so unfamiliar, Kaedin had to squint before the words became clear. Passenger Influence Research. The department didn't exist. Not in any official Aerolux documentation, not in any internal registry Kaedin had clearance to, and he had clearance for nearly everything. Trevin sucked in a breath behind him. "That's not a real crew ID." Kaedin's posture didn't change, but his voice turned cold. "You're not a passenger, and you're not here to fly." The man, still unnamed, offered a small, enigmatic smile. "I'm here to observe." Kaedin's mind flashed back to the shove on the jet bridge. The locked door. Dornell's increasingly erratic behavior. The denied access. It all connected now. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a glitch in the system. This was an operation. He took a step closer to the seat and looked down at the cushion. A faint indentation and a circular scratch pattern revealed a tray table had been extended repeatedly, far more than any passenger would use it during boarding. The tablet interface had likely been syncing with a secondary device, and given the half-open vent and the flickering lights, Kaedin suspected a relay had already been activated, likely tied to airflow or seat monitoring. "Is there something under this seat?" Kaedin asked aloud, not to the man, but to the situation. The man didn't respond. He didn't need to. His stillness said enough. Trevin leaned closer. "You think this is part of something bigger?" Kaedin didn't look away from the stranger. "No," he said slowly. "I know it is." Dornell tried to interject again, voice loud and desperate. "Dr. Rhyss, we really need you in 5C. Kaedin cut him off without turning around. "You've spoken enough, Dornell." He shifted his gaze to the tray table and slowly folded it down. At first, it seemed empty, just smooth plastic, but a small magnetic clip stuck near the hinge caught his eye. It was faintly pulsing blue. The pulse wasn't decorative, it was signaling. Trevin gasped. That's not standard issue, right?" "No," Kaedin said grimly, staring at the light. "That's part of a behavioral loop device, designed for reaction modeling." His voice dropped lower. "They wanted to see how I'd respond, and they planted it in the seat where they knew I'd sit." He turned to face the stranger again, who now stood calmly in the aisle, badge exposed, shoulders relaxed. Kaedin's voice sharpened like glass. "Who authorized this?" The man simply replied, "You were flagged." Kaedin's heart pounded, but his face remained composed. "Flagged for what?" The man only smiled. Kaedin took a slow breath, then looked past him to the seat, the vent, the blinking blue pulse. The seat was never meant to hold a passenger, it was meant to hold a plan. Kaedin's voice cut through the rising unease like a scalpel. "Why are you wearing an unauthorized research badge on a commercial flight?" The man in row 1A slowly lifted his eyes, unbothered, his fingers folding the diagnostic tablet shut with one practiced flick. "My presence is above operational clearance," he replied coolly. His tone wasn't loud, but it carried the quiet edge of a man who had never needed to repeat himself. Trevin took a step back, his hand brushing the seat beside him as if for support. His eyes flicked down, then froze. "Kaedin," he whispered, motioning subtly toward the tray table. Kaedin turned his head and saw it. The underside had been fitted with a compact module, its LED blinking blue in a calm, rhythmic pattern. To an untrained eye, it might have looked like maintenance equipment. But Kaedin wasn't untrained. The stranger, who had yet to introduce himself, sat with the stillness of a man waiting for a reaction. His name tag remained flipped backward, just visible enough to confirm it was deliberately hidden. Kaedin reached for the overhead bin, needing a moment to steady his own thoughts. As he opened it, his eyes narrowed again. Wedged inside, beneath the corner of the emergency mask box, was a loop of coiled tubing, air sampling lines, industrial grade. Too many connections for basic environmental control. He didn't need to touch it to know it didn't belong there. Before Kaedin could say anything, Dornell appeared again like a shadow refusing to recede. "We'd like to reseat you to 5C, sir," he said, his voice tighter now, "just to avoid further issues." Kaedin didn't look away from the stranger as he spoke. Why was this seat pre-wired? The man stood now, finally revealing his full height. Tall, lean, with a posture more suited to a lab than a cabin aisle. "We needed to monitor your physiological response before the conference tomorrow," he said, as if he were commenting on the weather. Kaedin's stomach turned, not from fear, but from understanding. They weren't trying to hurt him directly. They wanted data, readings, stimulus, and response, something they could use against him when he presented his ethics framework to the International Regulatory Board. Trevin leaned closer, his voice low. "You should move, just until we figure out what that device does." Kaedin shook his head. "If I move now, I give them control. I won't do that." He crouched near the tray table, eyes level with the blinking device. The frame was smooth, matte black, the kind used in covert diagnostics, engineered to pass through casual inspection. Carefully, he tilted the casing just enough to see underneath. There it was, a miniature countdown display, half-shielded behind a sliding panel. 60 seconds. Paused. It hadn't started yet, but it could. He recognized the model. He'd reviewed a near-identical schematic during a safety audit 2 years ago. It wasn't built for oxygen regulation or structural testing. It was designed for one thing: dispersion of low-volume aerosols into controlled environments. Officially, it was called a response chamber calibration suite. Unofficially, it was a behavioral provocation device. Kaedin rose slowly, placing himself between the stranger and the module. Dornell, sweat now visibly clinging to his temples, muttered again. "This isn't a big deal. Let's just get you into another seat." "No," Kaedin said, sharper now. "This seat was selected, modified, and I want the captain to confirm who authorized this man's assignment before I take another step." The stranger finally spoke again. "My name is Varen Kest," he said evenly. "I'm with Passenger Influence Research." Kaedin blinked. That department didn't exist, at least not on any organizational chart he'd seen. The name sounded deliberately vague, as if constructed to sound legitimate while concealing its true function. He knew what this was now: a pressure test. They weren't here to observe behavior. They were here to provoke it. Dornell shifted again, trying to stand just behind Kaedin's shoulder, too close, too ready. But Kaedin didn't flinch. His breathing slowed as he forced calm into his chest. He needed clarity, not anger. That's what they wanted. Anger. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. Not enough to alert the passengers, but enough to signal that someone had remote access to cabin controls. Kaedin saw Trevin's expression tense again. Behind them, a few first-class passengers whispered to each other, sensing something out of place but not yet understanding it. Kaedin turned to face Varen completely, blocking the aisle. "I will not move until the captain himself confirms the legitimacy of your presence. Not Dornell. Not you. The captain." Varen didn't argue. He simply folded his arms, smirking faintly as if amused by the resistance. But his eyes gave away something else, a flicker of calculation. Kaedin wasn't reacting the way he'd hoped. He wasn't folding. He was holding. Kaedin's fingers tightened around the handle of his briefcase. The encrypted one. The one with the manifest card. The one whose lock he'd silently set to record mode the moment he felt that shove on the jet bridge. They thought they were measuring him. They had no idea he'd already started measuring them. The real test had nothing to do with air. It had everything to do with control. Captain Roan Emerus stepped out of the cockpit just as the air in the cabin grew heavier with tension. His boots struck the carpet with purpose, a steady rhythm that silenced the murmurs rippling through first class. His eyes moved fast, first to the strange badge clipped to Varen Kest's jacket, then to the exposed device blinking faintly beneath the tray table in row 1A. For a long moment, no one spoke. The blue light from the device flickered across the captain's face, casting shadows under his sharp cheekbones. He frowned. "Who authorized a diagnostic module installation without my clearance?" Captain Emerus asked, voice low but sharp, like steel drawn slowly from a sheath. Varen's relaxed mask slipped for the first time. His shoulders stiffened just slightly. He turned his head, pretending not to hear the question. But Kaedin Rhyss was already watching him, noting the exact twitch in Varen's jaw, the kind that signaled calculation under pressure. Dornell Trask stepped forward, his voice cracking as he attempted to intervene. "Captain, I believe there was an operational." Silence. Emerus cut in without even turning. His palm was raised flat, and his glare did not shift from Varen. Dornell froze mid-step, his throat bobbing as he swallowed the rest of the sentence. Kaedin said nothing, but his eyes flicked from the captain to the module. He could feel Trevin Merrick beside him, breathing shallower now, like someone who'd realized just how deep the water had gotten. Kaedin's grip on the seatback tightened. It wasn't fear. It was preparation. Before anyone else could speak, the cabin intercom sputtered to life on its own. Row 1, clearance incomplete, hold subject in place. The voice was distorted, almost robotic, but loud enough to silence every conversation in the front half of the aircraft. A ripple of unease spread through the passengers seated nearby. Captain Rhyss turned pale, his mouth parting slightly. That command wasn't in any known airline protocol, and he knew that because he helped write them. Kaedin's gaze narrowed. "Systems breach," he muttered under his breath. Then louder, firmer. "I'll be filing an immediate report for unauthorized tech deployment and systems compromise." Varen leaned slightly toward him, voice low, nearly inaudible. "Predictable," he whispered, and for a second Kaedin froze. That same word, Dornell had used it earlier at the gate. They were quoting each other. Coordinated. Scripted. Then a faint click sounded above Kaedin's head. The overhead oxygen mask panel shifted, just a crack. Not enough to deploy, but enough to expose the seams. Enough to show tampering. Rhyss turned toward the cockpit, hand raised to signal his crew. "This flight is grounded until further notice," he announced to the cabin. "I want this module dismantled." But Varen was already in motion. He moved fast, unnaturally fast. His finger tapped the side of his wrist device 3 times in rapid succession. There was a sudden mechanical hiss, followed by a loud thunk. The cabin doors locked from the inside. Every emergency release handle clicked into lockdown position. Passengers gasped. Trevin gripped Kaedin's arm. "We're not getting off," he whispered, the weight of the truth sinking into his tone. Captain Rhyss lunged toward Varen with surprising speed for a man of his age and build. His hand reached for the device on Varen's wrist, but Varen twisted at the last second, sidestepping and pushing the captain backward. The movement was clean, practiced. Rhyss stumbled into the aisle, catching himself on a seat arm as a passenger shrank away. Kaedin didn't move. His hand reached calmly into his coat, pulling out the digital manifest card again. Without a word, he raised it slowly toward the nearest cabin security camera embedded above row 2. The red sensor on the camera blinked once, then twice. The light was recording. Kaedin didn't break eye contact with the lens. "You see this?" he murmured, more to the camera than to anyone else. "You're the only witness I trust right now." He didn't look at Varen. He didn't need to, because at that moment, everything became clear. The tech under the tray table, the half-latched oxygen mask panel, the reassigned seat, the push on the jet bridge. They hadn't just tried to keep him off the plane. They were trying to trap him on it. Row 1 was never about comfort. It wasn't about status. It was about containment. Trevin stood behind Kaedin now, shoulders squared, every muscle taut with silent tension. Dornell hovered near the flight deck door, eyes flickering back and forth, unsure whether to bolt or blend in. Varen stood motionless, arms crossed, staring back at Kaedin not with fear, but with interest, as if wondering what his subject would do next, as if Kaedin was no longer a passenger, but part of the test. Kaedin lowered the card slowly, never dropping his gaze. Someone had turned row 1 into a command center, and Kaedin was the target inside it. The attendant smirked, confident his intimidation would work, unaware that every record, every passenger detail, and every procedural right had already been secured by the CEO. If you believe cruelty under privilege always folds when preparation meets power, hit subscribe now, because justice never hesitates. Passengers gasped as the blue light beneath the tray table flared to life, casting a cold, pulsing glow across row 1. The countdown timer blinked aggressively, an unmistakable signal that something had been triggered. Varen Kest leaned slightly forward, tapping his wrist device with practiced ease, his expression unreadable. But Dr. Kaedin Rhyss didn't flinch. Without waiting for an explanation, Kaedin stepped in front of the tray table, shielding it from Varen's view with his body. The sudden movement drew alarmed murmurs from passengers nearby, many of whom had no idea what was unfolding, only that the tension had spiked, and something was very wrong. Trevin Merrick's voice cracked through the chaos. "Captain, can you override it?" "I'm trying," came the captain's urgent reply from the front, his voice strained over the intercom. "The controls aren't responding. The cabin functions have been rerouted. This isn't standard." Kaedin heard the words but kept his eyes on the device. He'd seen this kind of module before, not in use, but in design schematics and prototype sketches, most of them rejected for ethical reasons. Varen had made a mistake assuming he could intimidate a man who had spent his early engineering years designing safety and behavioral response systems. Kaedin knew the language of circuits, of tamper triggers, and fail-safes. He crouched quickly and popped open the small access latch beneath the tray table. The inner cavity revealed a tight bundle of wires and tubing, familiar but not comforting. One translucent tube pulsed with a viscous fluid that caught the blue light in small glints. Kaedin narrowed his eyes. "Aerosol dispersal," he muttered half to himself. "Behavioral grade, low toxicity, high irritant index." Trevin's breathing had grown louder beside him. "That thing's gonna release something?" Kaedin didn't look up. "It's meant to trigger a reaction, not just physically, psychologically." From behind them, Dornell Trask blurted out, "Varen, shut it down." But Varen didn't even blink. His voice remained smooth, composed. "The reaction data's already being collected." Kaedin froze. That confirmed it. This wasn't an experiment for internal calibration. It was a setup. Every sensor, every reaction, especially his, was being logged, meant to be presented later as evidence of instability. He was being framed. The plane's ventilation system suddenly emitted a deeper hum, vibrating faintly through the floor. Kaedin's gaze shot upward. The overhead vent directly above row 1A had shifted open slightly, the inner casing glinting with unfamiliar markings. He understood instantly. If he cut the primary power, the system would default to the secondary circuit, the failsafe. The module would release its contents through the aircraft's environmental vents. Kaedin stood abruptly and yanked a meal tray cover from the service slot near the seat. Trevin flinched as Kaedin jumped onto the armrest and jammed the tray cover tightly over the half-open vent. The plastic scraped against the paneling, and he twisted it hard to wedge it in place. Passengers in surrounding rows began whispering in frantic tones now, their fear escalating with every mechanical sound. Kaedin could hear the confusion and rising dread, but he blocked it out, staying focused. One mistake, 1 second of hesitation, and this cabin would become a sealed chamber of panic. "Kaedin, please," Trevin begged. "Step back. Let the captain deal with it." But Kaedin stayed rooted. "This wasn't meant to be stopped by the captain," he replied grimly. "This was meant to bypass everyone, including him." Varen tapped his wrist again, eyes narrowing as he waited for something to shift in his favor. But Kaedin had already spotted the pattern. Each tap corresponded with a fluctuation on the tray table module. Varen was executing remote sequences, not just monitoring. Kaedin turned back to the table and took one decisive breath. With a powerful motion, he slammed the tray upward, causing the bracket to snap from its hinges. The device jarred loose and fell forward with a sharp rattle. Before it could reset, Kaedin reached down, grabbed the exposed casing, and tore the battery unit free from the base. Sparks flickered as the module shorted out, the blue light blinking once, twice, then vanished into darkness. The cabin stilled. The sudden absence of light, of sound, of motion, it created a vacuum of tension. And then came the shift. Varen's jaw clenched. Dornell staggered backward as if he just realized the lines had been crossed. Trevin stared at Kaedin like he had just watched someone defuse a bomb. The scorched metal of the tray table device clattered as it rolled onto the floor, echoing like a warning bell beneath their feet. And Kaedin stood tall, breath steady, voice quiet. Varen expected compliance, but Kaedin delivered resistance instead. The device clattered against the floor with a sharp metallic scrape, sparks blinking erratically as it spun once before sliding under the galley cart. Gasps spread like a wave through the cabin. Kaedin didn't move. His leg remained extended from the kick, his eyes locked on Varen's next move. Across the aisle, passengers stared wide-eyed, unsure whether they had just witnessed an accident or the start of something far more dangerous. Varen lunged forward instinctively, but Kaedin stepped into his path. "You don't want that back," Kaedin said evenly, his voice low but unshakable. Varen halted mid-step, frustration flaring across his face. The veneer of control he had worn so confidently began to peel. Before he could respond, another voice cut through the cabin. "I didn't know the device would activate," Dornell blurted out, his tone higher than before, breath catching. He had stepped back from row 1 entirely, his hands half raised, palms out, as if innocence could be declared with open hands. Trevin, standing close to the aisle divider, turned on him. "You shoved him on the jet bridge," he said, voice trembling but clear. "You locked the door. You were part of this." Dornell flinched, the weight of Trevin's gaze sharper than any accusation. The captain, who had stumbled in the earlier blackout, now stepped back into view, pulling himself upright using a seat back. "Step away from that device," he barked, glaring at Varen. Varen didn't move. Instead, he pressed a command on his wrist device with surgical precision. The lights cut. Screams erupted. 3 seconds passed in absolute darkness. Then, emergency lighting flickered on, bathing the cabin in blood-orange glow. Passengers clutched seatbacks in each other, faces pale in the dim hue. Kaedin's mind shifted to threat response mode. The blackout hadn't been a scare tactic, it was a system reset. Someone had tried to rewrite cabin protocols, override cockpit permissions. But who else had access? From the far end of the cabin, a figure rose. Another man. Calm. Silent. Kaedin recognized him instantly. Karen Soln. Maintenance supervisor. A technician he had once debated over safety protocols and ethical AI integrations. That day, Karen had walked out of the boardroom in protest. Now, he was walking down the aisle with the same calm detachment he once showed while handling pressurized engine clamps. Passengers shrank away as he advanced, creating an unintentional corridor. The tension thickened. It wasn't just Varen anymore. Kaedin's shoulders tightened, heart steady but cold. This had never been about spontaneous sabotage. It had been planned. Karen stopped 2 feet away, his face unreadable. "You're interrupting a necessary evaluation," he said softly. Kaedin stared at him. "Is that what you call nearly gassing a cabin?" Karen didn't blink. "It was designed to test threshold responses. We needed unfiltered data. You made yourself a variable." Trevin moved to Kaedin's side, jaw clenched. "You mean a target," he snapped. Varen joined Karen, the two now flanking Kaedin with smug precision. The confidence had returned to Varen's posture. "We offered you a chance to step aside. You insisted on seat 1A. "And you tampered with it," Kaedin replied. "You wired a behavioral stimulant under the tray table, rerouted cabin controls, sealed doors." Karen gave a tight smile. "All documented in the name of adaptive systems research." "You mean sabotage?" Kaedin said flatly. Varen shrugged. "Prove it." Kaedin raised his right hand, holding the manifest card between 2 fingers. "This card logs every override you triggered, every system rewrote, every unauthorized seat assignment." His voice rose only slightly, not with anger, but with control. "You've already proven it." Varen's smirk twitched. Karen's hand dropped slightly from his side. The confidence faded, just a touch. Behind them, several passengers pulled out their phones, unsure if they should record or remain still. The mood had shifted again, like a plane caught in sudden crosswinds. Kaedin stepped forward. "You weren't tracking data. You were trying to erase credibility. Mine." Neither man spoke. "The device might be destroyed," Kaedin continued, "but the logs aren't. The camera in the galley saw you reach for it. The override alerts were sent to System HQ. And this card? He lifted it higher toward the cabin camera above the front row. "This doesn't just identify me, it verifies every moment I was blocked, every reroute you ran." Varen exhaled slowly, the smugness beginning to fade. Karen swallowed. Trevin glanced between them, then looked at Kaedin with awe. "They tried to trap you," he whispered. Kaedin didn't look away from the two men. The truth had been collecting evidence even when they tried to trap him. Chaos detonated in the narrow cabin the instant Karen Soln lunged forward. Passengers near row 1 gasped, chairs scraping as they instinctively pulled back, forming a loose semicircle of fear around the unfolding confrontation. Kaedin Rhyss didn't move. His stance was rooted, steady, unshaken. With calm precision, he raised the black manifest card and held it directly toward the nearest cabin camera. Its metallic edge caught the dimmed overhead light, flashing once, enough to make sure the recording log captured everything. The movement was silent but deliberate. A warning, a signal. Across from him, Varen Kest's fingers danced across his wrist device in panicked bursts, attempting to re-establish a connection with the tray table module Kaedin had just disabled. Each flick of his wrist reflected in the glare of the first-class windows, frantic, clumsy. He still believed the system was his to control. The captain's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Step away from the passenger, both of you." His tone was firm but edged with disbelief, eyes darting between Karen and Varen. But Karen didn't budge. He thrust out his hand and declared loudly, "This evaluation is sanctioned under Corporate Initiative Protocol 12-9. The words hung in the air like smoke, calculated, official-sounding, and designed to confuse. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to believe him or bolt. Whispers erupted. "What initiative? Is this real? What are they doing up there?" Dramatic irony sharpened its blade. Karen and Varen had spent the entire flight manipulating hardware and perception alike, but they underestimated one thing. Kaedin had built the override logging architecture embedded in this very aircraft. He didn't just know the system, he was part of it. Varen smirked from behind the flickering tablet light. "Trevin," he said mockingly, turning toward the young man beside Kaedin, "you really don't understand what you're stepping into." Trevin Merrick didn't blink. He took a single step forward, placing himself between Kaedin and Karen. His breath was shallow, but his posture was solid. His voice cracked slightly as he said, "I understand enough." It was enough to break the rhythm. Kaedin's voice followed like a falling hammer. "I know what this device was built for. I know the aerosol was never for ventilation testing. And I know you needed me to react, publicly, violently, before tomorrow's ethics summit." Karen's face tightened. He hadn't expected Kaedin to see the entire arc. The captain pressed again, angling toward Varen. "Surrender your device, now." "No," Varen replied without flinching. Then, as if punctuating defiance, he tapped a final command. A hiss, a hydraulic groan echoed behind them, followed by a deafening thump. The rear cabin door sealed. The audible snap of the lock sent a wave of panic through the aircraft. One woman shrieked in economy. A father pulled his son closer. Crew members exchanged helpless glances. The captain stepped back, briefly thrown off balance. The flight deck no longer obeyed him. But Kaedin didn't falter. He moved forward, not toward the aisle but directly toward Varen. There was no tremble in his hand as he held the manifest card higher. "This card," he said quietly, "already uploaded everything. Every override, every seat reassignment, every unauthorized module. Even if the power cuts, the evidence is safe." The words slid across the cabin like ice water. Varen blinked. For the first time in the entire flight, his confident posture crumpled. Behind him, Karen hesitated, body swaying between fight and flight. His jaw clenched as he scanned the cabin, realizing escape was no longer an option. Too many passengers were watching now. Too many cameras. Too much data. Kaedin turned toward the front wall of the cabin, stepped toward the intercom panel and pressed the call button with a calm, purposeful hand. The click echoed with finality. "Ladies and gentlemen," Kaedin said into the speaker, his voice clear and even. "Row 1 is under hostile manipulation. Remain seated. Do not panic." Silence answered him, but it wasn't confusion. It was trust. And Varen knew in that instant that the experiment was over. The audience had shifted. They were no longer subjects. They were witnesses. The moment he spoke, the cabin stopped being their experiment and became his witness. The lights dimmed once again, and for a single breathless moment, the entire cabin seemed to hold still, time suspended, air thick with apprehension. The silence was suffocating, pierced only by the low mechanical hum of the ventilation system overhead. Then, without warning, a voice broke through the intercom, calm, sharp, and wholly unexpected. "This is Draven Knoll, Chief Security Officer, Airlux Oversight Division. The tampering has been detected. Live feed uplink is active. All research personnel are to be contained immediately." The announcement dropped like a stone into a still lake. Heads turned. Murmurs erupted. Kaedin didn't move. His mind locked onto the voice. He recognized it, not just in title but in tone. Draven Knoll was known across the upper executive ranks for his precision and absolute intolerance for protocol breaches. That meant this situation had already escalated beyond the cabin. The moment Kaedin exposed the tampering in Row 1, the aircraft's automated compliance system must have triggered a remote alert. Varen and Karen had activated their own trap and walked straight into a bigger one. "Captain Rhyss," the voice continued, "isolate Row 1. Lock cabin positions. Maintain forward galley integrity. Do not allow personnel shift." Captain Roan Rhyss stepped forward without hesitation. His face was tight, his jaw locked. He turned on his heel toward Varen. "You heard him. You're not going anywhere." But Varen was already moving. He darted for the aisle, heading toward the rear cabin, attempting to disappear into the crowd of stunned passengers. Trevin moved on instinct. His hands grabbed Varen's arm mid-lunge, nearly losing his footing as Varen resisted. "Not this time," Trevin said through clenched teeth, pulling back with all his weight. Kaedin surged forward to support him, but the captain was already there, producing 2 flight-certified restraint bands from a pouch near the wall. In seconds, he had Varen's wrists pulled back and secured. Varen struggled once, then stopped as he noticed the flashing red indicator on the forward camera. Everything was being recorded. Karen Soln, still by the side bulkhead, began stepping backward slowly, sweat streaking down the side of his face. "I didn't know this would happen," he stammered. "I didn't activate anything. I was only following instructions." Kaedin turned to face him, eyes narrowed, voice controlled. "Whose instructions?" Karen's mouth opened, then shut again. His eyes flicked toward the sealed cockpit door, then the cameras, then down at the floor. "You can't answer," Kaedin said coldly, "because the answer incriminates more than just you." A click echoed through the cabin as the forward crew intercom reactivated. Draven Knoll's voice returned, this time more severe. "Be advised, the research division that Mr. Varen Kest claims to represent was decommissioned 6 months ago following multiple ethics violations. There is no sanctioned testing protocol associated with this flight. Repeat, this is a rogue operation." The impact of that statement reverberated through the cabin like a thunderclap. Passengers gasped aloud. A man in row 4 muttered something and stood up, only to be waved down quickly by a nearby crew member. The whispered conversation shifted from confusion to fear to dawning understanding. This wasn't a systems test. This was sabotage disguised as procedure. Kaedin watched the ripple effect in the passengers' eyes, the dawning horror that they had unknowingly stepped into the middle of something orchestrated and dangerous. Trevin leaned close and whispered, "Are you okay?" His voice trembled, still shaken by his confrontation with Varen. Kaedin gave a single nod, though tension still locked his shoulders like armor. "I will be." Captain Emrys, now fully in command, turned toward Karen and gave a final, irrefutable command. "Sit down. Hands forward." Karen hesitated, looked once toward Kaedin, then complied. His shoulders slumped as the restraint band clicked around his wrists. Varen and Karen were marched, one after the other, into the forward galley, placed under watch by the remaining flight crew. The passengers sat in stunned silence, their eyes occasionally flicking forward as if unsure whether to applaud or prepare for another shock. Kaedin exhaled slowly, for the first time since he stepped onto the jet bridge. But the breath brought no comfort. Draven's voice came one last time, quieter but filled with weight. "Mr. Rhyss, investigations will begin the moment this aircraft lands. The override modules, cabin access logs, and passenger profile edits all trace back to one source. Someone gave these men access, and it wasn't from the flight crew." Kaedin didn't blink. He already knew. Deep down, the pattern had become unmistakable. The data, the clearance, the targeting. His jaw tightened, because he suspected the truth already. The real enemy wasn't in the cabin. It was waiting for him on the ground. The plane jolted slightly as its wheels hit the tarmac at Velmore Aerodrome. A yellow emergency beacon strobed along the edge of the jet bridge, signaling a Level 2 protocol landing. Kaedin Rhyss didn't wait for the fasten seatbelt sign to turn off. He stood before the aircraft even fully halted, the manifest card clutched in his palm like a weapon of truth. Trevin Merrick sat beside him, silent, eyes wide, watching Kaedin's posture harden into something more than corporate precision. It was personal now. Outside the cabin, compliance officers in charcoal uniforms and black gloves waited in tight formation, scanning the fuselage. The door hissed open with a hydraulic sigh. Kaedin stepped out first, not escorted, not restrained, but as the man who had just exposed a breach from the inside out. The air was cold and sharp. A low murmur rippled through the passengers behind him as he exited, many offering subtle nods or soft applause. Gratitude hung in the air like static. Two officers flanked Kaedin at a respectful distance, not to contain him, but to shield him. At the end of the jet bridge stood Draven Knoll, Chief Security Officer of Airlux, holding a sealed black file folder thick with preliminary data and flagged reports. He said nothing at first. His eyes scanned Kaedin, scanned the way his suit was dusted from the scuffle, the scuffs on his briefcase and the faint line of pressure still on his brow. "Dr. Rhyss," Draven said, voice neutral, "we're ready for your full statement. But you should know, the flag in your passenger file wasn't a system error." Kaedin didn't blink. "Then someone manually altered my profile." Draven nodded grimly. "At 11:42 p.m. last night, someone accessed your itinerary and inserted a behavioral risk tag. That's what enabled the override that reassigned your seat and triggered the subject monitoring protocol." Kaedin exhaled slowly, the edge of betrayal slicing deeper than he expected. "Only directors have clearance for behavioral overrides." "Correct," Draven said, "and only one director touched your profile last night, Zaylen Korv." The name hit like a dropped hammer. Kaedin's jaw flexed, the tension crawling down his neck into his spine. Zaylen Korv, a former ally turned professional adversary, had once tried to dismantle Kaedin's proposed ethics reform, arguing it was restrictive to innovation. Now it was clear. The sabotage wasn't just about obstructing his presence on that flight. It was about discrediting him before he could speak at the ethics summit the next day. Behind them, Karen Soln and Varen Kest were escorted down the jet bridge in restraints, flanked by two compliance officers each. Both shouted over each other, their voices desperate, contradictory. "I was following emergency directive protocol. He said the summit was already a risk. We didn't know the device would activate." Kaedin didn't turn. He had already heard enough lies mid-air to last a career. Inside the terminal, investigators took possession of the dismantled module that Kaedin had ripped from beneath the tray table. The secondary relay still glowed faint blue, now sealed in a containment bag. One officer handed Kaedin a digital receipt for evidence transfer. He signed it without hesitation. Trevin stepped forward, quietly giving his statement. His voice trembled slightly as he recounted the shove on the jet bridge, the confrontation inside row 1, and the moment the device began its countdown. The captain, stern and controlled, stood by his own flight log, confirming that the rogue research department hadn't been authorized for active field deployment in over 6 months. No clearance logs, no pilot notifications, no system flags were visible until the breach began. This wasn't a systems flaw, he said flatly. This was a coordinated bypass. Dramatic irony thickened as passengers walked past, whispering to one another, many glancing at Kaedin as if seeing him differently now, not just as a tech executive, but as the man who had nearly been pushed, literally, off a flight so that another man's data experiment could succeed. The same summit that Kaedin had been flying home to address had nearly become his undoing. The irony didn't escape him. The people behind the sabotage had tried to weaponize technology against the man who had built safeguards into it. Kaedin turned to Draven. I want full investigative access. As an executive partner, I'm entitled to it. Draven handed him the sealed file and nodded. You'll have it. Every security override, every command trace, every time-stamped line. Kaedin accepted the file and tucked it under his arm. He could feel the quiet eyes on him, those of passengers, officers, staff. Not with suspicion, with awareness, recognition. They had watched the unraveling of something more than just a failed research protocol. They had witnessed a conspiracy unfold in real time. Trevin walked beside him, still shaken but steadier now, glancing back once as Karen and Varen were taken toward the security lounge. Kaedin said nothing more. His silence held more weight than protest. As the crowd began to disperse, a final thought took shape in Kaedin's mind, something not just true, but necessary to speak. He turned slightly, gazing down the same jet bridge where the first attack had begun. The attack wasn't just on his body, it was on his integrity, and he intended to defend both. The tribunal chamber erupted the moment Kaedin Rhyss tapped the final log entry onto the projection screen. The digital overlay expanded across the room's curved glass display wall, revealing Zaylen Korv's executive clearance code tied directly to the Row 1 override authorization. There was no ambiguity. The timestamp matched exactly with the moment Varen Kest had been seated. Kaedin didn't need to say anything more. The silence that followed was louder than any accusation. Zaylen, seated 3 chairs down, shifted forward, eyes locked on the terminal code as if willing it to disappear. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the arms of his chair. The tribunal's lead advisor, Chairman Lauren Vale, turned slowly toward him. Director Korv, he said, voice dry but sharp, do you still wish to deny your involvement? Zaylen's mouth opened, then closed again. His suit looked stiffer than it had moments before, as if it no longer fit the man wearing it. He finally leaned into the mic with a brittle calm. I didn't know they would activate anything. It was only supposed to be a diagnostic scan. I thought it would go unnoticed. Kaedin stood at the center of the room, unmoved, his posture a portrait of composed strength. You thought wrong, he said plainly. You thought using me would give your department leverage. What you didn't think was that I would survive it and bring the truth here. The tension fractured. Zaylen's voice turned pleading. Kaedin, this was never about personal harm. It was about policy. Your ethics framework, if passed, would kill 10 years of research. I had to create an argument for alternatives. If I had let you present unchallenged, you risked a cabin full of passengers, Chairman Vale interrupted, his voice rising for the first time. You staged unauthorized personnel, triggered illegal diagnostic modules, manipulated a boarding manifest, and directly endangered a contractual partner of this airline. Zalen looked around the room for allies and found none. The board voted swiftly. Hands raised. 1 abstention. Zalen stood slowly, removed his executive pin, and placed it on the table without a word. His shoes echoed hollowly as he walked out, the door sealing behind him with a faint hiss that felt like a final verdict. Kaedin remained silent. It wasn't victory he felt, it was clarity. Cold, clean, earned. Dramatic irony pulsed beneath every heartbeat in that room. Zalen had tried to orchestrate the fall of Kaedin Rhyss, only to trigger the single reform that would change aviation ethics forever. After a short recess, Chairman Vale reconvened the session. "Dr. Rhyss," he said, turning back toward him, "do you wish to submit a formal recommendation based on your findings?" Kaedin nodded once and stepped forward, unrolling a digital scroll pad from his inner coat pocket. His voice was low but firm. "I propose the immediate adoption of the Rhyss Passenger Integrity Protocol. It requires third-party oversight for all cabin technology testing, public or private. Any experimental module must be approved by an independent ethics board. No department, no director will ever again have unilateral power over passenger safety or behavior monitoring." The board members leaned in, scanning the proposed framework. The clauses were clear, enforceable, and precise, drawn from the very events of the flight that nearly sabotaged him. One by one, the members signaled their votes. It passed unanimously. Trevin Merrick, who sat quietly in the back of the tribunal chamber, exhaled for the first time in minutes. He caught Kaedin's eye, offering a small, respectful nod. Kaedin returned it. Trevin had been a quiet witness to every moment that mattered, and now he would help shape what came next. Outside the chamber, media buzzed like a swarm, but Kaedin said nothing to them. Not yet. He wasn't interested in press. Not until the system had changed. Within the week, investigators published their full report. Varen Kest and Karen Soln were permanently barred from aviation research after it was confirmed they had knowingly tampered with cabin systems and submitted forged credentials. Their names joined a database of blacklisted researchers under international aviation safety law. Trevin received an unexpected offer soon after, from the Aerolux Ethics Supervision Office itself. His calm presence and courageous actions during the incident had caught attention, and they wanted him on their permanent review team. For a long moment, Trevin simply stared at the offer. Then, with a quiet breath, he accepted. Weeks passed. Kaedin returned to the work he had nearly been cut off from. His ethics summit was rescheduled, this time with full support. When he stepped onto the conference stage, the room rose in a standing ovation. He looked over the audience not with pride, but with resolve. He wasn't the same man who had walked onto that jet bridge. The weight of what had nearly happened, the attempt on his credibility, the near hijacking of passenger trust, the betrayal from within, still echoed inside him. But so did purpose. He began his presentation calmly, laying out the updated framework, case by case, clause by clause, each shaped by the confrontation they thought would break him. And when he finished, the auditorium fell silent. Kaedin let that silence stretch. Then he closed his laptop, stepped forward, and spoke the final line, his voice clear, steady, and unforgettable. "They tried to push me off the jet bridge, but they only pushed me into the truth. The CEO pulled the manifest, exposing every misstep, leaving the crew frozen and the airline fully accountable. If you believe real authority combines knowledge, control, and decisive action, subscribe now, because justice always lands first." Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It highlights prejudice, abuse of authority, and the power of composure and strategic action in confronting wrongdoing. Its purpose is to raise awareness, inspire empathy, and encourage conversations about equality, accountability, and respect for every passenger.